Hello everyone and welcome to this video tutorial in which I'm going to talk you through how to apply the law on assault in criminal law to a mini scenario. And this is a really good way of revising the law on assault and checking not only do you remember and recall all the key cases and principles, but that you're actually able to apply those rules and principles to a given scenario. And of course, that's a skill that you're going to need in your A-level law exams. So let's take a look at the scenario that we've got here involving some Simpsons characters. So the facts are these: Nelson waved his fist at Bart and whispered, "If Chief Wiggum wasn't over there, I'd smack you." And you're being asked to discuss Nelson's criminal liability. Notice that this particular question doesn't tell you that you need to apply the law on assault. It just says discuss his liability. Your exam questions won't always tell you either what topic it is. You would have to have read the limited facts that you're given and have deduced by the fact that we've got an action here that it's potentially the non-fatal offence against the person, specifically assault, that you need to apply. Now, to get a good answer to this scenario question, I recommend that you use the IDEA structure. And if you've watched any of my other videos on my channel, you'll know that IDEA is the structure for using with scenario questions to maximise your chances of getting full marks. The I stands for identify, the D is define, the E is explain, and the A is apply. And on my next slide here, I've put in red font the I, the D, the E, and the A in my answer, so you can see exactly how I've structured this suggested answer to the scenario. Now, for the purposes of this slide in this video, I've just written in a very bullet pointy style. It's very brief. Obviously, in the exam, you would need to write in full sentences and fully elaborate on the cases and the principles that you're discussing. But let's have a look at the answer then. So first of all, I need to identify what offence Nelson might be guilty of. So I've started by saying Nelson might be liable for an assault on Bart when he waves his fist. So it's really good practice to identify both of your characters. So we've got our defendant Nelson and our victim Bart. And it's also good practice to say that they might be liable, even if you think he is guilty. It's good practice to say they might be at this stage until you've shown your working, if you like, to the examiner. And it's also good to point out which facts from the scenario, in our case waving the fist, have led you to believe that it's an assault you should be applying. The next stage is D, to define the offence which you've identified in stage 1. And to define the law, you always need, in criminal law anyway, to define your actus reus and to define your mens rea. And you'll notice that I've done everything to do with the actus reus in green and everything to do with the mens rea in blue, just to make it easier for you to see on the screen what I'm doing here. So I'm going to define an assault by saying, firstly, the actus reus of an assault is an act or words which causes the victim to apprehend the infliction of immediate unlawful force. The mens rea is intention or recklessness, that's what the IR stands for, intention or recklessness as to whether apprehension is caused. So I've identified, I've defined, I now need to explain that definition that I've just provided. And you'll notice that I'm going to explain all of the actus reus first with cases, and then I'll explain my mens rea afterwards. So firstly, to explain the actus reus, I'm going to say an assault requires some act or words, silent telephone calls like island, letters like in Constanza, or gestures like pointing a gun at somebody logged in could potentially be an act or words that would be sufficient for an assault. I'm then going to explain what immediate in my definition means. So the word immediate means imminent, not instantaneous, and that comes from the classic case of Smith and Woking, which tells us that an assault can be committed through a closed window. Another important rule that applies in our case, I hope you spotted it, is that words can negate an assault. That means that words can take away what would otherwise have been an assault because the words themselves are indicating that actually no force is going to be used. So in the very old case of Tuberville and Savage, if you recall, we had the defendant who put his hand on his sword and he said, if it were not assize time, I would not take such language from you. And what he was really saying in old-fashioned language was, if the courts weren't in town, I would fight you now. But he was saying, in essence, the courts are here, so I'm not going to. He was telling the victim that I want to do it, but I can't. And that's a very important principle for this particular scenario. So I've explained my actus reus. I'm now going to explain my mens rea. So the mens rea for assault is intention or recklessness as to whether the victim is going to fear that force is going to be used imminently against them. So quite often our defendant intends to scare the person. That's the whole point of pointing a gun at someone, is you are intending to scare them. But it could be done recklessly. So it could be sort of a joke or taking a risk, not realizing that your body language or your words are going to scare someone. But if it's a reckless thing to do, you're still going to have the mens rea for assault. So you can see I've identified the offence, I've defined it, I've explained it using cases. I then need to A, apply it back to my characters. And your explanation acts as a bit of an essay plan really for your application. You need to go through all the rules that you've explained and apply them back to your characters. So in our case, I'm going to say that Nelson doesn't meet the actus reus of assault. Now, although he's waved a fist, and a threatening gesture, such as waving a fist, can be an assault, Logden tells us that, his words that accompanied that gesture, i.e., if Chief Wiggum wasn't over there, negate an assault. So it's just like the case of Tuberville and Savage. So he doesn't meet the actus reus of an assault, he's not going to be guilty. However, even though I've decided that he doesn't meet the actus reus, you should still go on anyway and consider whether he meets the mens rea, because you want to demonstrate to the examiner that you know how to apply these rules, even if you think they're not particularly relevant at this point. So applying the mens rea, what we could say is that if Nelson had not said this, there would have been an assault because Nelson clearly meets the mens rea, because it seems that Nelson intends to scare Bart. That's the whole idea. If you wave your fist at someone, you are trying to intimidate them. But he would certainly be reckless as to whether Bart was fearful, even if he didn't have the intention. So our conclusion, and I should have really put a concluding sentence there. In conclusion, Nelson doesn't meet the actus reus because his words negate an assault. If he hadn't used the words, if he'd just have used the gesture, he would meet the offence because he has the intention, or at least the recklessness, to cause Bart to fear that force is going to be used against him. Now, what I would like to say about this is you can see on this slide, I've used what I call the standard idea format, where I've done I, D, E, and A. So I've done a big chunk of E, explanation, and a big chunk of A, application afterwards. What's slightly better practice is to explain a rule and apply it. Explain a rule and apply it. So in essence, you would have EA, 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 if that makes sense. The reason that's better practice is because it means that you won't miss anything out. You know, if you do all of your explanation and you run out of time, you're not going to get any marks for application because you'll have missed that out. Whereas at least if you explain, apply, you'll be maximising your chances of getting both types of learning objective in there. but I've done it as a separate E and a separate A because when you're first starting out, it feels easier to do it this way. But you should definitely practice with both. So just to talk you through some of the EA approach, if you like, instead of doing all of our explanation and then all of our application, what we could have done is explained. An assault requires some act or words, such as silent phone calls, islands, such as letters, constanza, such as gestures, logged in. Apply it straight away. Nelson meets this element of the actus reus because he uses a gesture like logged in by waving his fist. And then we'd go on and explain immediate means imminent, not instantaneous, Smith and Woking. In this case, it seems that Nelson meets this requirement because he's waving his fist at him. Presumably he's in the same room as Bart, so therefore it's going to be imminent. And then you'd explain words can negate, Tuberville and Savage, apply it straight away to Nelson and say Nelson's words also seem to negate an assault because he's saying that he would do it if Chief Wiggum wasn't there. So hopefully I've not confused you there and that makes sense. If you're happy doing it this way, doing all of your explanation, then your application, then stick with that. But as I've said, once you get confident with it, it's nice to EA, EA, EA as you go through until you reach your conclusion. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I do have other videos on my channel on the other non-fatal offences against the person, so you can watch those if you need some revision on those other topics as well.